with its themes. Before we see, may I kindly request everyone to place their mobile phones on silent mode. We also encourage minimal movement during the exercise so as to maintain the electrical and providing an uninterrupted space for social exchange. Thank you for your understanding and cooperation. With us, a distinguished group of scholars and practitioners whose contributions to education, diplomacy, and gender studies have been nationally and internationally recognized. Chairing today's panel discussion is Professor Parveen Sinclair, a distinguished academic, former director of NCERT and pro-vice chancellor at IGNOU. With over 3 decades of experience in the education sector, she has made significant contributions to curriculum development, especially in mathematics education. Professor Sinclair played a pivotal role in shaping India's national education policies and reforming school education through her work in curriculum design, multimedia pedagogy, and teacher training. Her leadership in both NCERT and IGNOU has been instrumental in advancing education through innovative and inclusive approaches. Our esteemed panelists are Ambassador Ranjit Ray, former Indian ambassador to Nepal, Hungary, and Vietnam, and an expert in South Asian diplomacy, regional cooperation, and development. His strategic insights bring an important geopolitical and intergovernmental dimension to today's dialogue. Shri Abhimanyu Singh, chairperson of the Foundation for Education and Development and former director of UNESCO's offices in Nigeria and Beijing. A senior civil servant and educationist, he was responsible for steering the constitutional amendment to make elementary education a fundamental right. Shri Singh has led major international and national education initiatives as Director of Education for All Paris and continues to guide large-scale community and adolescent education programs in India. He has also worked as chair of Global Drafting Committee in 2000. Professor Krishna Menon, Professor of Gender Studies at Ambedkar University, Delhi, has over 2 decades of teaching experience, having previously taught political science at V.D. Shriram College. She has co-edited influential works such as Doing Feminisms in the Academy, The Gendered Body in South Asia, and Social Movements in Contemporary India. She was also the co-editor-in-chief of the International Feminist Journal of Politics and is currently the honorary director of the Dalai Lama Studies Fellowship Program at the Foundation for Universal Responsibility. Should I briefly introduce the authors as well? Okay. Dr. Deepa Menon, a respected educationist working in gender rights and development, practitioner known for her community-centered feminist work. She has worked in education and emergencies across countries such as Somaliland, Afghanistan, Nepal, and Bangladesh, with a focus on early learning, girls' education, and empowerment in education and emergencies. She was instrumental in conceptualizing the program Puran. Professor Namita Ranganathan, a senior professor and distinguished academic at the Department of Education, University of Delhi. Professor Ranganathan's research has advanced the fields of childhood education studies, mental health, and foundations of education. She has engaged extensively in field researches and evaluation studies of girls' education through various projects over the last 2 decades. Mr. Sanjeev Rai is the Registrar of Delhi Teachers University and an expert on education and emergencies. He has previously worked with organizations such as the Swedish Committee for Afghanistan, EAA Foundation, Save the Children, CARE, UNICEF, and Tata Institute of Social Sciences. Dr. Rai has recently completed a special assignment as officer on special duty to the Governor of Jharkhand on university reforms. We now begin with reflections from the authors of the book. Their contributions not only offer empirical insight but invite critical thinking of the educational landscapes across South Asia. May I now request Namita ma'am to please take.
Thank you, Mansi. Mansi has made us all sound very big. We aren't that big. We are very ordinary mortals. But I want to share with you, the sound is all of us are on. But Mansi was on too. Okay, thank you. What I want to actually say to all of you is that, the panelists have gone through our book, the chairperson and the panelists, and I think they are in a better position to tell you what our book is about. But I just want to share with you how this idea germinated. So, during COVID, we were all stuck in our homes and we were doing all these online meetings and we were rediscovering our friends and our associates. And so Geeta, Sanjeev and I met online. We've known each other for a long time. We have similar training and background. And all of us were interested in doing something in the domain of girls' education, which was interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary, transdisciplinary. This jargon has been going around in education for a long time. So we said, let's do it. And Geeta and Sanjeev have, this very, very rich experience of working in South Asia. So Afghanistan, Pakistan, Nepal, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh. I had none of this, but I have rich experience of working in India, and I also evaluated some of their projects, etc., on girls' education with a team of people. So we thought that since gender cuts across disciplines, it's important that we kind of marry the disciplines, the development sector which they represent and academia which I represent, although these sort of sequestered, segregated silos don't really exist. So we thought, let's dovetail our experience. That's why the word experience is also in our title. So we got thinking, and it took us almost 6 to 8 months to develop what we wanted to do. And we said, let's just do it. And I'm very happy to share that, Routledge was very forthcoming. Amit is here, he's our commissioning editor. Amit, where are you? Here's Amit. He was our commissioning editor, so we just wrote to him and we said, Amit, we have this book proposal, and he said, send it, and then he got it reviewed and he gave us a go-ahead. So what we have actually done is that, we have tried to bring field realities and classroom discourse together. And we've tried to distill all the principles which underlie the strategies which the development sector also uses. And they use with a lot of success. The other thing which we've tried to do is we've tried to use micro contexts to understand what realities are. And from those micro contexts, draw macro propositions and also theorize. So we've kind of taken a grounded theory approach, if I put it into a research state. And the experiences are very, very many. I mean, there's lots to share, but I think the panelists would be commenting on all of that. One thing which I want to say to all of you is, why did we take South Asia? So, South Asia has become a very, very important domain of studies in every discipline. You have a South Asian Studies Center in every university. And whether it's history or political science or education or sociology or whatever, you have South Asian studies and people come together. The other reason why we took South Asia was that it represents a huge diversity, a spectrum of diversity. And yet, if we look at the human development indicators, there are many, many striking commonalities. So we decided that with the varied geographies of South Asia and the different historical interludes that South Asia has, let's do our work on South Asia. And we also have Sanjeev and Geeta with vast experience in those domains. So girls' education and empowerment became big after the World Declaration on Education for All in Jomtien in Thailand in 1990. And that's when, gender inequalities, gender inequities, the need for gender justice, etc. became huge as one of the propositions. And there was a lot of work going on in these domains. So we've drawn from all of that. There is a historical aspect to what we have written, but we've written it with a contemporaneity of purpose. So someday if you get to see this book or read a review of this book or whatever, we'd like to keep you, we'd like you to keep our lens in mind. Geeta will take you through this a bit more. Geeta, over to you.
Good evening, everyone. It's so nice to see friends and familiar faces over here. Like Namita said, this book has been in gestation for quite some time, and it's an attempt to bring the praxis and the principles behind this praxis together. I think as the panelists talk about the different chapters, we would be seeing what those practices look like, and there would be more informed discussion on it. I would like to really thank Namita for bringing the idea of this book. I've been a development professional most of my life, and done some good work. I have a lot of experience, as she has been saying, in various contexts. But writing a book was not ever, it didn't occur to me. So in a way, it was nice being neighbors with Namita, and she literally pulled me on this side of the fence to get me writing the book. So thanks to Namita and thanks to Sanjeev, with whom we've had some marvelous discussions and kind of worked on this book together. Even as we talk of South Asia and why South Asia, and that's the chapter 1 that we have in the book. It's 8 countries, and does it kind of come together as a region, unison in its thinking and unison in its approach? Then no, it's nothing like that. There is a lot of diversity in its economy, polity, and governance structure. So there's difference, and there is difference in size. There are some island countries, which like Maldives and Sri Lanka, which are small countries, and then you have the larger ones also. So all the countries are proximous, they're close together geographically, and there's something else that binds them together, and that is widespread inequality, economic inequality, social divisions, social hierarchies, the kind of entrenched patriarchy and structural, those structural barriers, regardless of the size, are there in almost every country. And add to this whole issue of conflicts, disasters, that this region and most of the countries seem to be plagued with. And this has impact on women and girls, on all children, but much more women and girls. I won't take a lot of your time, but there are 4 points which I would like to highlight, and which kind of struck me as we were writing the chapter on South Asia. The first one is that thanks to the EF efforts, we did see almost all the countries, the enrollment and completion rates of primary education increased phenomenally, and that was a good thing. But there were disparities in the 8 countries. So you have Sri Lanka and Maldives, which were like nearly universal education at 99%. But on the other hand, we also had countries like Afghanistan and Pakistan, where barely 50% of children completed their primary education, and Bangladesh, Nepal, India were somewhere in the middle of this development. But what struck me most, and this, honestly, we've struggled to find an explanation for this, but this is a fact that at least we brought to the forefront, is the whole steep decline of enrollment and completion at upper secondary level. It's amazing. It drops to almost 40%. From 99% of completion in primary education, we have a scenario where only 40% children in some countries finish secondary education. And this figure goes down even substantially to about 10%, 20%, less than 10% in some of the countries. And this is an alarming fact. And this I'm talking for girls who are unable to finish their upper secondary education. And the surprising fact is that it's not only girls who are unable to finish their upper secondary education, but barely 50% of boys are able to graduate out of secondary schools. And this, I think, needs some sort of an examination in the next volume or by some other researchers. As we began to write this book, we also wanted not to just concentrate on education, but also try and see indices of gender empowerment and education together. And one of the challenges which we had was we struggled finding a common database. So we had a census report from Bangladesh, which was conducted in 2022. And then we had India, where the census report was 2011. There was no way we could compare the two. It would lead to very erroneous kind of observations. So we struggled to find something that could, we could compare the 8 countries and tell you a story. And so we relied on the UNDP report, which has kind of a global report, and we culled out of that report the indices for the 8 countries. Now, the empowerment indices are very interesting. So it talks of gender empowerment in terms of financial inclusion, access to mobile or internet, health services, and so on and so forth. There are others which I will come to. Whereas there was some progress in the region in getting access to mobiles and financial inclusion, it looked a little better story, 50% or 50% and more. We come to the other indicators, and what do we find? What we found was that in terms of secondary education again, for 25 plus, the percentage of women in 25 plus going to upper secondary education was dismal. Participation of women in parliament across the countries, and where you have Sri Lanka and Maldives, the achievement at 90 plus universal education in primary. When it comes to the representation in parliament, it is barely 5%, 8%, or even less. The maximum women representation in parliament comes in Nepal, which is about 33%, but it's because of the reservation policy that they have. The other aspect of gender indices were adolescent marriages and childbirth. I mean, it's like 70%, 73%, 60%, India, Bangladesh, and Pakistan. That's the percent of adolescent women going through childbirth in these countries. And mind you, we are talking of the most populous countries in the world. So the whole dimension of adolescent childbirth is kind of mind-boggling. The other indicators which we need to be concerned about was the violence against women. That to the percent of women experiencing violence was really beyond 60%, 70%. So you have violence against women, early marriage, childbirth, no participation in democratic processes, and then the worst of all was women's participation in workforce. Whereas 90% of men are there in the workforce, we barely find 30% women. That's the maximum. 30% women who are participating in workforce. This could be true for India and Bangladesh. They would have better of the percentages. But when you go down to Afghanistan, and the surprising part is that Maldives and Sri Lanka, which again boasts of good indicators otherwise, don't seem to have many women who are participating in the workforce. Bhutan has a better, at 64%. Bhutan is way better than other countries. So, education and empowerment needs to be seen together. That's one of the lessons which we learned very, very strong. So you may have these beautiful programs which NGOs have done, but if they are not kind of affecting lives of women, we are somewhere missing the bus, And so that whole chapter 1 tries to bring out this whole story about gender issues and empowerment. My last point is that there are a number of issues, and hopefully the panelists will talk about it as to why this story exists in the region. On the positive side, one of the things which comes across is if you have egalitarian policies, if the government is committed to egalitarian policies where equality is enshrined and its commitment is enshrined in constitutions and policies, and you do have an egalitarian community, a society which practices equality, the progress and life for women and girls is way more better when Either of the two is not there, or both of them is not there. And in the 8 countries we have different scenarios. There are policies, but the community is kind of fragmented and not as practicing egalitarian principles. There are divisions, there are hierarchies, there are patriarchy. Or you have scenarios where neither the government nor the community, both do not practice egalitarian principles, and that's where the whole problem gets accentuated. So with that background, I hand it over to Sanjeev, who is dealing with two of the most difficult countries. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. It's an honor to stand before you all today, and I'm deeply grateful to the remaining panelists and distinguished guests present here. I feel privileged to contribute to this important book alongside my esteemed teacher, Namita ma'am, and Geeta ji, who entrusted me with my very first assignment in the development sector long back in 2002. I would also like to express my heartfelt thanks to Dr. Alka Rai, my wife, and to children, Vidu and Ku, for their unwavering support in the long journey. My gratitude also extends to my friends and colleagues in Nepal, Afghanistan, and within our own country, whose encouragement has been invaluable. If you see Nepal and Afghanistan together, in both the countries, like in 95, 96, the CPN Maoists started preparing ground for the People's War in Nepal. And the register is there on 13 February 1996, the Chalis Budaman 40 points demand was given by the CPN Maoists to the then Prime Minister Devwadi, that if you don't fulfill these demands, we will go for the armed struggle against the state. So out of 40 points, there were 6-7 points related to free and compulsory education, scientific education, stop gender discrimination. At the similar time, Afghanistan, after departure of USSR forces, the Mujahideens started fighting with each other between 1992 to 1995, and then the Taliban emerged in 1995. So in 1996, the Afghanistan became the Islamic state, and in Nepal, the Maoist and other political parties were struggling to make the Nepal as a secular and multi-party democracy. The women were the major stakeholders in Nepal's 10 years long armed struggle and all the political movements, starting from panchayat system and to democracy. But on the other side, in Afghanistan, when the Taliban came, they started putting several restrictions. No? Even the women's dress, their movement, they can't do a job, they can't go to school, and schools and higher education institutions have been attacked. It was attacked in both the countries. It was occupied in both the countries, but nature was different. And teachers were tortured, kidnapped, they were forced to pay a certain percentage of their salary in Nepal as well as in Afghanistan as well. So I'm not going in much detail, I'm just Spring 2005 aptly stated, the opening of schools will provide no hope for the future if the textbooks provided and the teachers in the classroom continue reinforcing divisions and prejudices. Without meaningful reform and inclusion, access to education alone cannot heal or build our societies. So, there are several other interesting stories of child marriage. I was in Nepal in a village called Puranpur. So, a girl who was studying in 8th standard, the family engaged her for marriage. In another 3-4 months, she was about to get married. Because she was inclined to join the PLA, People's Liberation Army. So family thought that if she joins, the Royal Nepal Army and the police will come and we all will be in trouble. So they just married. And similarly in Taliban's case and in Afghanistan case, early childhood marriage is very prevalent there. So I encourage you all to delve further into these insights, thoughtfully addressed in the book we are launching today. And thank you once again for the opportunity to share these with you all. Thank you.
I forgot to say two things. I must say them. We co-wrote this book. You know, first we thought we'll take specific chapters, etc. And then we said no. You know, because we're trying to marry sectors, we need to co-write. So we had some doldrum moments, but we have many aha moments also. And I really discovered that when you co-write, it may take longer to come to a consensus and decide what you want to actually put down as your textual narrative, but it gets substantially enriched. So I would recommend all of you who are, you know, planning to write books collaboratively, please co-write. That's one thing. I just want to give you one illustration of another phenomenon, which is contextualization. Okay? We've all studied about, you know, how it's important to look at contextual realities and respond to them, and also develop strategies, etc., which are contextual in nature. So Mr. Singh will of course elaborate much more on this. There is one strategy which is used commonly in girls' education, that is residential schooling or residential camps. But you know, residential schooling works differently in different contexts. So in India, it helps to get the marginalized girls from very, very backward communities to the mainstream system. You keep them in a residential school or a residential camp. You re-socialize them, you kind of enrich them with all kinds of experiences, you give them new learnings, and you get them ready to become women of substance. That's one method, that's how it works in India. But in Bhutan, it doesn't work like that. You know in Bhutan how it works? It helps you to actually transcend all the geographical barriers of getting to school also. Weather vagaries, geographical barriers, etc. So residential schooling is used equally for boys and girls to ensure continuity in schooling. And in Afghanistan, because there is so much religious orthodoxy, and you know with the return of the Taliban, girls' education we all know took a complete backstage. The residential school is used to give you a safe space where you can challenge the orthodoxy and you can actually pursue and continue your education. And one story which we've taken is, it's called the School of Leadership in Afghanistan. After the Taliban came back to power in 2022, that school was not allowed to function in Kabul any longer. It was a residential school. And you know, Rwanda and Africa invited them, and that school now survives there. And there are a lot of people who have fled from Afghanistan who have enrolled their girls in that school. So I just wanted to talk about contextualization. So we've taken stories of various kinds to kind of illustrate what the position is. I think, Mansi, you can now come, please.
Thank you, authors, for taking us on a journey of how the idea of the book was conceptualized and how authors came together to share ideas and bring in their unique perspectives. Your work reminds us that the struggle for gender justice in education is both urgent and deeply rooted in lived complexity. May I now request Professor Parveen Sinclair to kindly chair today's session and moderate the discussions with our esteemed panelists. Following this, we will have Q&A session where the audience can engage with the panelists.
So, good evening. I'm glad so many of us are here. For those that may not have seen the book so far, we're not doing any formal opening, but this is one supposedly fancy version of the book, and there's an Indian version, or India version coming out soon, or South Asia version coming out soon. Want to closer. Truly in your face. Okay. We've got Ambassador Ray, Krishna, Professor Krishna Menon. She's been with me for a long, long time, Professor Krishna Menon, and Dr. Abhimanyu with us today to discuss the book further beyond what the authors have told us about it. Before that, I'd just like to say that to me, while going through it, it's a very comprehensive look, as you may have gathered already from the discussion, of the scenario, female education at the early and adolescent stages, and the consequent empowerment. A big plus point is also a comprehensive collection of bibliography in the form of references of each chapter. That's very useful. But to start with, from the point of view of questions to ask ourselves, which I think are very important also. Right at the beginning, there are several questions the authors pose about the situation, given the backdrop of education, and particularly taking them further into areas that are not considered areas for women to study, even or work in. If it's vocational training, also vocational, and they wouldn't be trained as plumbers or electricians or something, so on. So what are the principles and assumptions that guide them? Do they focus on all the strategies that have taken place and that are discussed in this book? Do they focus on re-socialization or alternative socialization processes? Was social change mediated, and if so, how? How was safety ensured, particularly in conflict situations? In this context, I'd just like to remind ourselves that, the residential schools that were just spoken of, supposedly safe spaces, but we have seen many cases where neither for boys nor for girls have they been safe spaces. And the other issue that comes, and I'm talking about India just now, and this would be true of the other countries which have similar patriarchal and other issues that dominate the hierarchical structure, social hierarchical structures. The issue of how many cultures get killed with all this in the process of holding residential schools, not camps but schools. Those haven't been spoken of over here. It's actually a very optimistic look also, though there is an analysis, partial analysis of some of the schemes that have been taken up. But I would still strongly recommend it as a look at the strategies, as I said, because it's comprehensive, and to take these questions further. Therefore, it's important, an important addition. The question that was raised by us also, when you looked at the book, it's by South Asia, and then you start saying, yes, these 8 countries have so much in common and so much not in common, and how much we have in one place about South Asia. So we need to find that out too. This helps in that. So I wanted to just start on this note, and of course I'll maybe later talk about some more issues. I'd like to first start with Ambassador Ray. He would be expected to give the South Asia perspective largely, with focusing on the geographic, political and economic importance of South Asia, particularly as a highly populous region. Some country-specific examples showing the common factors that run across the countries, highlight some of the challenges that some of the countries face, and maybe also talk about the larger importance of educating children in general, boys and girls, maybe a bit more on girls given this program in the region, across the region. Ambassador Ray.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and distinguished authors. It's a fantastic book. Many congratulations, panelists. Pleasure to be here, but you know, I'm like a fish out of water. I'm neither a scholar nor an academic nor an expert on education, let alone girls' education. But I do know a little about the geopolitics of our region and India's place in, of course, the South Asian region and the broader Asian region and the world. And you know, I think this is such an important contribution to our knowledge about our region. You know, you'll be amazed. You know, we're talking about South Asia. How little people know in our own region about ourselves. You know, people know so much more about what's happening in the US and Europe and other places, but a lot of ignorance about South Asia. I mean, I've seen that in the context of, you know, I was ambassador in Nepal. So many people, you know, well-to-do, well-heeled people who've never ever been to Nepal. It's an hour and a half away. So there's huge ignorance, and I think, you know, the more publications we have like this that inform all of us about our region. And why South Asia? You know, I mean, look at India sitting in the center. We're like, you know, the hub with spokes in all directions. Every other country is connected to each other through India. So India has such a critical role to play in every aspect of South Asia. And it's so important to have a publication like this because you learn about what other countries have done right, have done wrong. So you can learn, you know, from the experience of others, perhaps apply it to your own, you know, your own situation, especially since you're so close culturally and in other ways. So it's very, very important. And you know, on the geopolitical side, we always say that, you know, for India to develop rapidly, we need a region that is stable, at peace, that is integrated economically and in every way. So I think it's very, very important for us to focus on this region, to know much more about it, and I congratulate, you know, the authors for this, and I hope very much that your book will be available in South Asia. It's important that it's available not just in India, but you know, our neighbors should be able to read about it. You know, but then there are also a lot of problems. You know, I was just looking at some data in terms of the magnitude of the problem. You know, I don't know how correct this is, but I found somewhere that there are 170 million girls in South Asia and only 36% complete secondary education. Can you imagine? 64% of girls do not complete secondary education, and it's, you know, only 1/3 of the girls complete primary education. So that, you know, the task for the region is huge, and obviously you need a lot of resources. And it's not only in terms of infrastructure and schools and teachers and, you know, things like that, but also quality education. And here I want to bring in, you know, one other country, and perhaps that's for your next book. I'll come to that a little later, because, you know, you cannot limit yourself to what's happening in South Asia. India's competitors are not necessarily in South Asia. India's competitors are in countries like Vietnam, Indonesia, where they're doing much better than us in terms of education, in terms of women's empowerment, in terms of women's employment, participation in the labor force. In Vietnam, for instance, 100% of women participate in the labor force. They may not get the same wages as their male counterparts, but all of them have jobs. And just imagine, in terms of women's empowerment, independence, agency, it makes a huge difference. So I think, you know, we are not competing with countries of South Asia. We need to understand what's going on, but we are competing with some countries outside our region, and perhaps, you know, for your next book, some ideas. Now, if you look at the global situation and our regional situation, it's not very conducive, you know. I mean, look at what's happening globally. All foreign aid is being reduced, especially after Mr. Trump, President Trump in the United States. The US aid has shut down a lot of programs, and I know that a country like Nepal is pretty badly affected because NGOs and civil society organizations, international NGOs, played a very important role in the education sector, especially in terms of monitoring government schemes and programs and coming up with ideas in terms of what the government should be doing. So that has gone. And who's going to fill that gap? The Europeans are also very, very busy with looking after their own security and beefing up NATO and spending more money in the defense of Europe. So my own sense is that international assistance for developing countries, which came through a lot of these NGOs, is going to reduce sharply. So countries will really have to stand very much on their own feet. So can India do something about this? We are a huge donor to countries like Nepal. Is really for, how should I say, infrastructure projects, building schools, dams, roads, and things like that. Not so much in terms of, say, focusing on areas like, what to do in girls' education and so on. And maybe that's something that our policymakers need to think about, and on the basis of that book. So this is one point. And the second point about our region, of course, is that the whole region is in a flux. And there are some scholars who actually say, why talk about South Asia? What is there that's common? If you look at our entire region, it's going through a lot of turmoil. Afghanistan, Pakistan, the relationship between India and Pakistan, look at Bangladesh. So the concept of South Asia, at least in terms of SAARC, the South Asian Association of Regional Cooperation, it seems to be, at least the organization is in a limbo. And I think after the latest Kashmir attacks, it's on a ventilator, as one of my colleagues said. So in SAARC, there's no prospect. So which forum do you discuss a book like this in? There is no forum that we have that brings all the South Asian countries together to discuss common issues. And that's why I think it's so important that new forms of regional cooperation should come about. And we are talking about this sub-region of BBIN, for instance, Bhutan, Bangladesh, India, Nepal. We are talking about BIMSTEC. There's recently been a summit in Bangkok. BIMSTEC is a kind of bridge between South Asia and ASEAN countries. So I think we need to now start looking at some of these fora in order to discuss issues that are so important. The next point, of course, I wanted, which I made also, is that the education is, of course, critical for agency, for providing agency, but it has to be linked to remunerative employment. I think that's really very necessary, and especially for girls. There must be some opportunities for financial. Independence is too strong a word, but for some way of earning money. So we must see how this can be linked to job, opportunities for jobs. And I think, there are good examples to learn from. I don't know of any or many in South Asia, but I know the Germans, for instance, have a fantastic scheme whereby in class 10 you decide whether you go into, say, undergraduate studies and so on, or you go into vocational training. And the vocational training that is organized is in cooperation with the private sector, with industry. And the industry gives you or provides you the kind of training they need. There are organizations that develop the curricula and certify standards. And on that basis, you then get employed into those industries. So I think something like that in India, and especially for girls, I think is very, very important. The other thing about in Vietnam that I saw is that, I don't know, many of you may have seen this article in The Economist a couple of months ago, which actually said that Vietnam had perhaps the best education system in South Asia. And one, of course, not in terms of English language, and that is pathetic, but in terms of STEM learning and subjects like mathematics, which are not in India, traditional, although I think it's changing, many more girls are going into STEM subjects and mathematics. So I think this is another aspect, especially in a world where IT and artificial intelligence and stuff like that, you need people who will be able to participate in this new world that's emerging. And you have to prepare for that, and you have to prepare for it in schools. If our children are not competent to deal with these new technologies, then obviously the productivity of our workforce is going to be much lower than it could be. So I think we have to start at the level of the schools, and this is very, very critical. I had just one other point, and I don't know, but this is something I've toyed with in terms of the quality of learning. So everybody says there are lots of schools, teachers, children going to schools, but in class 5 you've done 5 years of education, you can't write a sentence. So there's obviously an issue of quality. And I don't know what can be done, but you have large numbers of civilians and military personnel retiring every year who are just sitting at home doing nothing. Why can't you provide some bridge courses and get these people, use these people to teach basic I don't know, mathematics or English and so on. And the last point is on English language. I think that's a great asset that we have. Obviously we have to learn our own languages, there's no doubt about it. But I think it's important, especially in a globalized world, when we're talking about, Indian as an IT superpower and stuff like that. English is a great asset. It's a comparative advantage we have over countries like Vietnam and Indonesia, and we must nurture it and nourish it and really benefit from it. Once again, congratulations to all the authors. Fantastic.
Thank you, Ambassador Ray. We now have Dr. Krishna Menon, who will take us, well, I'm going by this. Well, she'll take us through a lot more than what was expected of her. She will certainly comment on the book's attempt to highlight effective girls' education and empowerment strategies. And the focus on bringing praxis and theory together, which has been pointed out by the authors several times. Gender studies has been her area of interest forever, and that's the perspective in which she is going to.
Good evening, friends. I'm very thankful to the authors for having extended an invitation to be a part of this distinguished panel and to join all of you in engaging with this really important book, Girls' Education and Empowerment, Strategies and Experiences from South Asia by Geeta Menon, Namita Ranganathan and Sanjeev Rai. This is an important book because it not only looks at a constituency that is easily overlooked, that of girls, but it does so within the South Asian region, helping us map our patterns, helping us map out patterns in this region, learn from each other's best practices, as Ambassador Ray said, and engage critically with our own experiences. It's a book that has been authored by 3 scholars who have vast experience of engaging with the complex issue of girls' education, in addition to having worked at the grassroots with organizations in the South Asian region. This book is grounded in strong research and is also an engaging read. This is a combination that's not very easy to find, but that this book does remarkably. A historical perspective helps the reader contextualize the issues and challenges and appreciate the strategies adopted by the countries in this region. The book makes effective use of data, government reports, surveys, studies by NGOs, in addition, of course, to a vast body of academic literature on the specific theme of the book, as well as related ideas. For me, as a teacher of gender studies, the focus on girls' education is itself a strong bait, in addition to the focus on South Asia. I shall begin by sharing some thoughts on the latter, then place the volume in the larger debate within what has come to be referred today as girls' studies or girlhood studies, while also highlighting some themes that I was particularly struck by. So what is gained when we use a South Asian lens? This book has very insightful discussions on Afghanistan, Pakistan, Nepal, Bhutan, Bangladesh, India, Sri Lanka, and the Maldives. The book looks at the question of girls' education in these countries, framed by global issues such as the COVID-19 pandemic, the digital divide, climate change, displacement, migration, conflict situation, and the nature of political regimes. The nation state, more often than not, has been a favored vantage point to understand developmental issues such as education. So typically, studies would focus on India or Nepal or Sri Lanka, and so on, as distinct sealed units. Whereas a transnational perspective helps us place the issues such as girls' education and empowerment on a cultural, political, socio-religious continuum in the South Asian region, impacted by large historical forces such as colonialism, globalization, and the realities of a post-COVID world characterized by precarious economic and trade scenario. What would the issue of girls' education look like if these nation-state boundaries were to be disregarded? Sorry, okay, so we will move away from the nation-state for a bit, just as an experiment. This experiment is of particular significance in South Asia, where the configuration and reconfiguration of political boundaries has been contentious to say the least. Feminists in South Asia recognize that nation-states impose boundaries accompanied by mechanisms of power, surveillance, control, regulation, violence, and all of these, as Geeta said earlier, impact the lives and opportunities for girls in the region in very specific gender ways. Transnational scholars advocate looking beyond the supposedly fixed category of the nation state to be able to discern continuities and patterns, possibilities of solidarity and resistance cutting across the looming category of the nation state. This is especially relevant for the South Asian region. I'd like to spend a few moments deliberating upon the term South Asia itself. Like all other terms, it's not an already existing term. Unpacking the idea of South Asia reveals that its earliest occurrence as a term was in the title of a book published in 1928 in London, written by Horace Blakely. Of course, this gathering knows only too well that the term gained currency much later in the wake of the establishment of area studies in the United States. It is pertinent to remember that it was a professor of Sanskrit, Norman Brown, of the University of Pennsylvania, who sought to establish South Asian studies as a distinct area of focus. And the basis that he thought of was the supposedly shared heritage of Sanskrit language, thereby indicating some very obvious exclusions. This imagination of South Asia continues to have some currency even today, leading to a certain amount of discomfort in certain quarters with the category South Asia itself. Ambassador Ray hinted at that, but in a different context, of course. And instead, there is a preference for the term Indic cultures. Hence, the choice of the term South Asia by the authors has special significance. I'm sure it has special significance because it's not a mere geographical description. The term South Asia came to the region actually from outside. People in South Asia did not really describe their region as South Asia. And India certainly has an asymmetric presence within South Asia. The persistent domination by the Indian economy, polity, popular culture is an inescapable part of this region described as South Asia, resulting very often in suspicion and skepticism of the idea of South Asia. Thus, Nation-state politics casts its long shadow over academic, political, cultural, sporting and other initiatives that seek to explore transnational ways of thinking and being. And yet, accounts of migrants moving in search of livelihoods across South Asian landscapes and waters, stories of resistance and struggle, and solidarities across state borders have been inspiring in this region. I can't help remember the tireless work done by the late Kamla Bhasin and her marvelous organization Sangat, which was a network of feminists in the South Asian region. There has been a steady attempt to consolidate South Asian sensibilities from below, SAARC, etc. notwithstanding, to build new kinds of solidarities that self-consciously seek to move away from the nation-state. A very popular example, slightly flippant perhaps, is of course the musical collaboration spawned by the Coke Studio. I would like to think of this book as an attempt to engage with girls' education from a transnational perspective. In this context, I commend the authors of this volume for their attempts to map out pioneering and creative efforts by civil society organizations and people's movements in this region that have consistently worked with the issue of girls' education. For example, excellent discussion in the book on Mahila Samakhya, Sula, and others. It would be fascinating, however, for us to know if these organizations have attempted to speak with each other, cutting across nation-state boundaries and tried to support and learn from each other, thus helping us develop a strong South Asian understanding of girls' education in this region. Such an attempt would be very important, for instance, when the authors are trying to map the impact of conflict on girls' education in the region. When we engage with conflicts, such as the Rohingya crisis, challenges in Kashmir, Maoist-led uprising in Nepal, or the ethnic conflicts in Sri Lanka, we realize the intertwined nature of colonial history and contemporary cartography and its political fallout. This often makes transnational work difficult in our region, Dr. Rai mentioned that. And it impacts the initiatives taken by NGOs, people's movements, and even governments. And yet we know that conflict resolution and peace-building activities initiated by citizen groups are many. Have any of them focused on girls' education as part of their peace-building toolkit, I wonder, and I'd like to know more about this. Now I move to the figure of the girl and the disciplinary domain that has come to be described as girls' studies or girlhood studies. One of the earliest girl figures that has continued to cast her shadow on the question of girlhood, violence and empowerment in South Asia is that of that 10-year-old Bengali girl, remember her, Phulmani Devi, who died in 1889 after being raped by her much older husband, Harimohan Mehdi, on the wedding night. The Phulmani case involved more than a change in law. It transformed the cultural and legal understanding of the girl in colonial Bengal. The case catalyzed the emergence of the girl as a distinct social, medical, and legal category. She was seen as innocent, vulnerable, and in need of protection. This shaped much of the thinking about girls in 19th century India. The sentiment of protectionism, unfortunately, continues to be strong even today when it comes to thinking about girls and enunciating policies about girls. But who is this figure of the girl? Who is the girl? And when did she come to be studied in a systematic way? Mary Kearney has a very interesting and helpful definition. She defines the girl as those people who identify as female or feminine and young and are still financially dependent on their parents or guardians. Typically, this means female feminine youth between the ages of 0 to 18, whether cisgender or trans. Now, in both youth studies as well as in women's studies, girls were relegated to the sidelines.
seen as being of little interest, sometimes malign, or understood primarily as a site for the concern for the kind of future adults they'll become. Out of this absence grew the disciplinary focus on the figure of the girl and their experiences of life as girls, which is girlhood. This trend we can map out from the 1990s actually. Girlhood studies as a field has also, however, come to be criticized for its own omissions, for its preoccupation with the white, middle-class, heteronormative girl. Based on vast amount of literature that exists on girl studies or girlhood studies, I've identified 5 important dimensions of girlhood studies, and then we try to see how the book actually matches up to that. These are just 5 random aspects that I have picked up. I mean, it could be more, it could be less. So the complexity of girls' experiences, the diversity of girlhoods, the intersectionality of girlhood experiences, a dedication to understanding girls as agentic subjects and not as future women, and a commitment to including the voices of women. So if we look at number 1 and 2 in my list, which is diversity and complexity, the book scores really well, and it is trying to address that. And I was particularly gladdened to see that the book actually acknowledges the need to go beyond cisgender girls, and that's admirable. And therefore, I think this book certainly is qualified to make a strong claim to join the growing literature on girls' studies. A strong intersectional lens, however, that focuses on the challenges created by caste, religion, ethnicity, and region would certainly add more layers to this volume. An intersectional lens trained on the question of girls' education in India, for instance, would take us in many important directions, especially some where girls have resisted and demonstrated active agency, as in the debate, if you remember, from Karnataka in connection with girls' education. The girls in 2023 who were prevented from accessing their schools and colleges because of their veiling practices resisted and demonstrated very effectively the false binary between the kitab and the hijab as it came to be known. I urge the authors to carry this volume further and find space for girls' voices, especially those who have engaged with the issue of girls' education. It's serendipitous that while I was reading your book, the venerated feminist journal Science published an absolutely riveting interview with the Nobel laureate Malala Yousafzai and her father, conducted by Miranda Outman, the editor of Science. So I'd like to bring her voice into this discussion this evening. So Malala says, the status of Pashtun women cannot be improved by a simple plan, but only by a whole set of actions to combat the cultural, social, and structural barriers facing them. Transformation of this kind requires action on a variety of fronts to be drawn forward by a commitment to equity and justice. It needs a focus on education, economic empowerment, healthcare, cultural change, policy change. As a potent instrument for empowerment, education must be given top priority to ameliorate the lot of Pashtun girls living under Taliban rule. I now look at a very interesting aspect of the book that I am actually really impressed by, and I must congratulate the authors, which is of moving away from an instrumentalist approach to girls' education in favor of a human rights approach. Are girls the proverbial silver bullet in the pursuit of development? And the authors argue that that's not quite how you see the issue of girls' education. So we actually are echoing Malala's sentiments when she says that education cannot be the panacea for all ills. You have to look at the structural and systemic limitations and inequalities, and it has to be part of that program. In 2007, Plan International published its first Because I'm a Girl, State of the Girls report. which took a human rights-based approach and offered an alternative vision to the World Bank's gender equality is smart economics approach. And I place your book in that Plan International's perspective. Many initiatives from the 1990s aimed at adolescent girls actually ignored the structural forms of inequalities and put the responsibility for realizing their rights squarely on the shoulders of the marginalized girls, without actually engaging adequately with the unequal structures and systems of power. When we move to the 2000s, we see that there's a lot of attention today being focused on the phenomena of the celebrity girl activist. Girls have actually always been involved in activism related to labor and education. At least from the 19th century, we have records. But even much before that, we remember the tragic figure of the Joan of Arc, who was barely 13 when she was, burnt at the stake for heresy. The girls today who are the center of this kind of celebrity activism status, Malala, Emma Gonzalez, who campaigns for gun control, and Greta Thunberg, as we know, who cautions the world against climate change. Now what happens is that the media tries to single them out as these individually fascinating girls, and they don't really see these girls as carrying out actual serious political work. Hollywood is not to be left behind, and in 2022, if you remember, the Marvel Universe, the Marvel Cinematic Universe, created a Pakistani-American girl called Kamala Khan, whose job was to save New Jersey from all kinds of, she was a superhero, and she was there to save the city of, the state of New Jersey. American politics, so despite Hollywood doing this, American politics showed us just last year its continued hostility and discomfort with women. Kamala Harris, a case in point, when she tried to make a claim for the top office. So it's not enough to have these individual women or girls. What we really need is to look at the structures and systems. The last theme that I want to talk about is the digital divide theme, and I'll wrap up with that. It is an important concern, and the book talks about the several obstacles that girls face while accessing the internet or even devices. This is of great significance because this has a multiplier effect, as the author spoke about, and there's a very interesting work done by Sarah Will from the University of California, where she actually looks at, where she put out an ad on Instagram in India, and she invited 600 young people, girls and boys who use Instagram across 30 cities of India to talk about their political consciousness. And it's very interesting that more than 50% of the respondents, boys, said that they are very politically conscious. They describe themselves as politically conscious, but less than 1/3 of the girls, that means less than 29% of the girls actually said that they have any interest in politics at all. The boys said that girls don't do well in politics because of the individual choices that they make, whereas the girls seem to understand that there were structural reasons for them not being able to do. Now this finding has a bearing for what I heard Geeta say earlier, or perhaps it was Namita, on the success of, for instance, in India, the much celebrated Nari Shakti Vandan Adhiniyam, or the Women's Reservation Act, which was passed with great fanfare in 2023. As and when the act becomes a reality and 1/3 seats in the parliament are reserved for women, where will these women come from? If this is the kind of, and where will there be women who will focus on girls' education in parliament? This is a question that we need to think about, and therefore this digital divide is really important. Despite this divide, I want to end with, on a happy note. I can immediately think of two very interesting initiatives from South Asia, where girls are using social media to amplify their voices and their struggles. Girls at Dhaba, that's a Pakistani group of girls on Instagram who have curated literally girls at dhabas in Pakistan. And it's a project that's trying to make a case for girls' access to public spaces. And the Delhi-based Khadar Ki Ladkiyan. I don't know if you've seen this on YouTube. Another fascinating attempt. Khadar, from Madanpur Khadar. Khadar, yeah. I think that's Khadar, yeah. A close reading of this important book by Geeta, Namita and Sanjeev convinces me yet again of the need to move away from paternalism inherent to many much publicized initiatives, especially those focused on girls' education, and the need to move towards a discourse that sees girls as agential, rights-bearing persons. Thank you, and I'm sure this book will help us move a step closer to all the ends that we have been talking about.
Thank you, Krishna. That was a very, very nice contribution to this discussion. Wonderful contribution. Thank you. And now we move to Abhimanyu-ji. Mr. Abhimanyu Singh will now present his thoughts on, is expected to present his thoughts on. Yeah. How the book, that's why I said expectation, how the book focuses on the post-EFA, which is we mentioned 1990 scenario, which the book focuses on largely, where the government, civil society and communities come together for education programs, and particularly in the context of Dusra Dashak, which is what he was part of leading up and working with for a very long time. And he talked about the challenges of working with communities at the time, 1990 versus now.
Thank you, Kiran. I suppose my task is to prove that bureaucrats can also think. Former bureaucrats. Thank you for stimulating that. I've thought a lot, I worked hard for this presentation, but I think I have to get into a bullet train to say about it. Okay, I think the book, which has a comparative perspective of 8 South Asian countries, is really something one should recommend for all education institutions, libraries, and dissemination by international agencies, rather than put the burden on the authors to produce yet another book. I think we have to think how we can take this to the classroom, and I always say this at the end of my presentation, the translation, interpretation, and taking it really into the states where all the action happens, and in the districts and schools, that's a challenge we have. And I think we should try and live up to it. When we produced the Global Monitoring Report on EFA in Paris for monitoring the EFA movement, somebody said, so what, there are so many in our offices and our libraries, so what distinguishes one from the other, and why should we read one and not the other? And if we are really wanting to say that this publication is leading, then should we not say this is one of those publications which I do not remove from my table? And in preparing from this, I was almost saying do not remove it from under my pillow. It's a great book, and I think the comparative perspective comes through very well. And I'm amazed that when you talk about residentiality, if you read that part, it is not country specific. So it's very interesting that the analysis is country specific, but the recommendations and suggestions are universal. And that's where I thought that the authors have done a very good. I think in India, gradually, we have become more isolated in our country and in our practice. And I think that what we learned was that if you think together, then you'll work together. So I think this will stimulate thinking across borders. And that should happen within the so-called SARC framework, but otherwise too. I think there are these human rights and humanitarian issues which must be beyond politics, diplomacy, security, and we have to try to find new forums, that's what they say, to put this in the public domain. So you have double challenges, how to do it horizontally versus right and and the best part of the book is that they have a case study on our project. Thank you for that. I have a WhatsApp message from Geeta, dated 4 July 22, where she said they invite us to contribute to the book and that they have decided to include a case study. So that is the golden letter day for us. But see we don't see the invisible hard work over the last 2 years which have made it possible. So I would use it for advocacy across the board. And the chapter 2 in which there, I think no one has mentioned it directly, it has several very interesting systems. One on Vishal Bashak, one on care, one on Mehta Samatya, not only in India, but yeah. So coming back and down to why, what happened in India in that period with possible institutions like the FED and initiatives like Vishal Bashak, what triggered this off and can it happen again? And have the communities changed too much for that or that? The thinking in government also that's latter one is a difficult one to measure the whole fact. But I'll just take 2 tracks to explain what happened from 1990 to 2010, in which I was also involved as to how this is. Actually, if you the first statement I think which stimulates a lot of participation by NGOs, communities, decentralization, and so on, is the way in which the NPE, the National Policy in 1986, encouraged us to work with communities and non-profit organization and civil society to work for the poorest and most marginalized people. And that in turn triggered off a movement which then led to a lot of NGOs taking initiatives and making innovations which were not quite evident at that time. So it gave a very strong feel to this kind of leading in fact to a lot of international interest, funding and national funding to NGOs as well. For funding, for management, for doing the work they wanted to do, and also for working together, forming networks of NGOs. I don't know how many people remember something called Jabhat. When Bankar Roy worked on the Deputation and Planning Commission, and we formed in 1990 the Council for Advising People's Action and Rural Technology, drawing upon his own experiences in 500 NGOs. Then there was NAFRE, the National Alliance for Fundamental Right to Education, which launched a huge national movement to support the constitutional amendment bill, and then going on to the formulation of the right to education. And these were all part of the culture, the environment where we were open to ideas from all sides, and also critiques. One of the critiques of the India's education system was so critical coming out of the ministry that it was not allowed to be given in public. That was the backdrop of the NPE 86, because I was disputed. But you could write it and look at it. In fact, that's more important. So all this, and then the second track, of course this track then you have barefoot college saying you can run schools at night for the poor. And this becomes the non-formal education program of the central government. So there's innovation on the ground, somebody looks at it, somebody does it, and then you get it. You have MVF saying either you are in education or you are in child. And this still the camps, the rich camps. You have the International Institute, the Indian Institute of Education, Pune, which takes a different view, saying that NFE is necessary for working children. That also survives and prospers even today. Care for community education, mobile crash, you name it. In education and outside, you have a kind of golden era of NGOs doing good work, being recognized, being supported, and also you have a international recognition there. I believe in 1990 when the Jomtien Declaration was being drafted, with this some of India's contributions, I think, are not visible. Yes. When Mr. Bodia, we all know him, his contribution to opening up this system to India was much to the consternation of other bureaucrats. When we went there, we meeting the Indian delegation, there was a draft made by the World Bank and the international agencies, which was top-down, north-south. And that was thrown out, and a new draft came. Dr. Shyam Menon, I should recognize you, you are one of the founder trustees of FED, he's smiling. And a new draft came where then, again, you have the same reflection of the 1986 policy, where you are saying there is emphasis on community partnership, collaboration, civil society, and you cannot work for the communities because governments, however good, sincere, and legitimate that they may be, they are unable to reach the last 50%. And that is where the civil society has to come in. So it's a partnership, filling in the gap in service. And it is that way that the whole thing came up. And then in Dakar, where I was fortunate to be there was another movement saying that the international agencies like UNESCO had neglected civil society as partners, and therefore we boycott the Dakar movement. There was a huge call for boycott by British NGOs led by Oxfam and others. And then one has to appease them and also balance them because they were dominating the discourse. There were hardly any NGOs from the south which had that kind of voice and influence as Oxfam or Save the Children and so on had. So Dakar, our task was to balance the government and the NGOs as well as the north, somehow do something to curb the dominance of the northern NGOs. And that was done in it, and I should say that my experience in India really has helped me in this. Where then you could say with some confidence and a lot of assurance that yes, they can do it. And so our global campaign for education, GCE, of its Kailash Satyarthi, who won the Nobel Prize, was share of that. They became integral part of the machinery to monitor, review, and take the EFA forward. They were not sitting on the side. And then there was Education International, which is the largest body of teachers which came on. So this national and international play of factors went on till about 2010. And I must say with some, I suppose, sadness, that the delinking happens with the RTE putting all its eggs in the formal basket. And once you say that, legally, then you obviously the priority given to NGOs who are running most of the adult and non-formal education, and that goes away, and that is what. But in Dusra Dashak, coming to what you want to say, we didn't let all that come in our way. Our aim was to get the most marginalized sections of people, particularly girls, into education that is larger than school. We always made it a point that school does not equal everything. And that was the point NGOs were trying to make. Education is much more holistic, integrated, contextual, and flexible than what we teach in the curriculum. And one of the great barriers in Rajasthan, even now, two really cross-cutting barriers, caste and gender. And the question that was asked earlier on to the communities and to us was, is gender divinely ordained? Is caste divinely ordained. And the multiple response questions from answers are very interesting. How people think. And you raise these uncomfortable and provocative questions, and then the community is able to respond. And I think when we went in, we made a lot of halagulla ki hum aapko shiksha kar denge, you know how to talk about stuff. And they said, but we are not bothered about education right now, we are dying of malaria. So we said, okay, we work on it. So you have to be flexible enough to see what the community wants at a particular point of time. And after a lot of experimentation, thinking, should there be camps for 6 months, 4 months, 2 months, we came up with a 120-day camp, which was born out of our previous experience, where you get the marginalized sections identified through social mapping. So you have talked about school mapping, because school mapping is basically you look at the physical location of schools, health, temple, masjid, like that, but it doesn't show you the location of the social disadvantages. So one of the great, so there were two focus. One was 11 to 20 group, of which I think in that time 85% girls were out of school. In the group 11 to 20. It's much better. So that was the focus, and the second focus was how do you get them into a learning facility, and it takes 6 to 8 months to convince the family to do that, and then they come there, they stay there for 120 days. Now it will cost 10 lakh rupees for 4 months. But as you have said, two things happen. One is the experience of residentiality grows on them. Of course it's free, but it's rigorous. It's from 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. It's like a mini boarding school, but only for the poor. So we have our own resources. We don't get the rich in it. The curriculum is made by the people who teach. So you have always have Hindi and mathematics, but you have Samaj ki Parak. Samaj, the immediate environment is taken care of in many ways. You have caste, gender, community, all the issues, pollution, and you have life skills, how to negotiate. सबसे बड़ी लड़कियां कहती हैं हमने क्या सीखा, हमने यहाँ से उठकर बोलना सीखा और अब हम किसी को भी अपनी मन की बात फैमिली में बाहर कह सकते हैं. So that is an, you can see there already. So the learning will take you up to class 3, class 5, maximum in 120 days. It is not a what it does is it breaks those traditional structures and mindsets that exist. I think some research has shown that scheduled class there are 1100 in Telangana. In Rajasthan, you would feel that scheduled tribes is one category. In Kerala, not at all. In our camps, beings were not wanting to eat with others, other tribes, and native. So you see that. And the teachers are local. They stay there for 120 days. Parents are welcome to stay and contribute. So it's really a community feeling. Rules are there, but they are flexible. You learn in the morning, you learn at night. And you learn to live with each other. That famous, I think, UNESCO book, how to learn to live together. And that is a very good basis of harmonious, peaceful, prosperous society. Can you live together? And there was a boy who told me the other day, sir, अभी एक मटके के पास से अगर दलित गुजर जाता है आज की तारीख में तो मैं उस दिन पानी उस मटके से नहीं पीता. और मैं आपको ये गर्व से कहता हूँ कि मैंने ये अपनी चिंतन पकड़ दिया है और अब मैं और लड़का रेलवेज में आ गया तो वापस आके कहता है कि मैं शादी करूँगा और 1 भी रुपया डाउरी नहीं. तो मेरे शादी से उदाहरण और मैं उनके साथ मैरिज करूँ. These are small things. The question is, are they getting opportunity to speak, and are they reviewing their habits, their lifestyles in a way that makes them realize that they are very good. They are no less than anyone. The extraordinary, extra ordinariness that they have should not be mixed up with their ordinary behavior. So once that spark is lit, now we have had 200 camps, 1 lakh beneficiaries, we worked in 1,000 villages, and the only question that donors and government ask, what's the exit policy? You see the disjuncture in governments. So we had the courage to tell the government officer was talking. So you said there will be universal elementary education in 10 years. You said that there will be a regulation policy which will last for 10 years. You extended it by 75 years. Can you extend that to others to us? Why should we agree? You should agree. Who's saying anything? So you have give them the courage to ask this question, but also to work with government. अगर किसी के साथ कुछ अन्याय हुआ है, कुछ अब्यूज हुआ है, तो कहाँ जाना है? थाने में अपनी माँ कैसे अपनी बात करेंगे? गर्मी में रेलवे स्टेशन पे हलवाई है जगह known for its सच्चा बाजार predicts the election. वहाँ पर किसी के बिना गए, people go in the summer and take mudras of cool water. तो स्टेशन पे जो पानी मिलता है वो So I think that there are lots of issues with these projects and products which are non-political. And I think this book has quantified as much as they can. But I think we have to keep thinking, keep writing, and keep arguing our point with donors. That it's not all numbers and targets and so on. The processes which bring everybody together and make them live together in residence for 150 days, then they are carried over. So I think the point which is really great is that they are happy in the camp and they are happier outside the home. Because a girl's existence in the home means working from 5 a.m. to 10 p.m. With no recognition, no remuneration, and a lot of violence and abuse. And it will become much worse with COVID, and the economic crisis, unemployment, so on, and with social media. So I would say that the problem we are facing now is how to make best use of AI and the digital media. So the question people ask है सही हो जाएगा साइबर बुलिंग साइबर चीटिंग है वो ऐसे वो सब आप छोड़ दीजिए. सबसे पहले ये देखिए कि जो भी डिजिटल डिवाइस है या AI है सॉफ्टवेयर है उससे हमारे मार्जिनलाइज ग्रुप्स को क्या फायदा हो सकता है पहले इसको देखो. पहले से ही नुकसान देखोगे तो हवाई जहाज कभी उड़ता ही नहीं. तो इसलिए ये सब बातें और नाउ इंग्लिश किसी ने कहा यस when we talked about life skills, they said we want 2 skills. One is digital skill और हम इंग्लिश में बोलते हैं. कैसी इंग्लिश बोलना चाहते हैं? स्पोकन इंग्लिश. राजस्थान में उन्होंने कहा स्पोकन इंग्लिश गुड मॉर्निंग सर ये वो थोड़ा गाँव में बन जाता है. हम भी जानते हैं कॉन्फिडेंस है सेल्फ एस्टीम है रिस्पेक्ट करने लग जाते हैं वो आपको. तो फिर किसी ने कहा सर इसको कहते हैं ताबड़तोड़ इंग्लिश. अंग्रेजी की टांग तोड़ो पर बोलो अंग्रेजी. ये सब बातें करती हैं. ये स्पेस फॉर डायलॉग where you critique and when you think together is created by this. My job is to raise more questions. So the question is again 90 to 2010, a lot of things happen. Are they happening now? Can they happen now? Can they, so the book is a good record of what actually happened.
Sanjeev, in his very dark humor, was telling us that this book is very timely since most of the NGOs and the innovations on ventilator, and it is well that we document this. We don't know whether this whole circumstances will come together and we will go continue.
The good news, Sanjeev, is that Tata Trust has given us a grant. I shouldn't say another one, maybe, of over 10 crore. And right now we are negotiating with APF for another grant for 5 crore. There are scientific people who
I have seen the camp
आपने देखा है क्या?
chair is
तो मेरा आमंत्रण है, निमंत्रण है आपको कि हमारे कैंप्स को आके देखिए। कुछ
आप
समय
अपने कैंप में रह के सुपरस्टिशियस हो गए।
Good one.
Okay, so thank you Abhimanyu ji. And to the other panelists, the marvelous discussion on all aspects of this book. Before or maybe I say a few more words and then we open up for a couple of questions, if that's okay with everybody. I just wanted to say, I'm glad that Krishna ji brought up the, Malala, because I was finding that voice different very, very much. The other thing that I find missing in this very compact collection of ideas and strategies is a huge whole, disability. It's completely missing, and that is crucial, really, to, that's the most marginalized in us, not just in our society, in any society. You look at the social hierarchy and they're kind of just ignored. They were ignored initially even when the RTE came out, that had to be ignored. And I find that missing here. So maybe, I can't say that in the next time, but please, in the next time.
we accept this comment from you.
The other thing, a major point that has been made several times, I think, in the book, and I think all of us know this, just segregating the girls, making a difference in their lives, won't help. It's a societal thing, it's the mindset of the males have to change. And again we say, well, why should the girl be changed? It's the males who need to be changed also. Why should it only be the girls? How should they react in this society? And I think therefore the camps or the schools or whatever strategies apply to them. Only they do get many opportunities now. The point is being made for the ones who don't get. So what I'm trying to say is, it's like breast cancer. You don't just not address the males, but you know that they need to be addressed too to come under this. But okay. Now there's one point which I found very interesting. Chapter 4. The chapter is about the special challenges the countries face, like the children of nationalism in Nepal. But India has been left out of that chapter, playing safe. I think no situation, challenging situations are not mentioned there. It is to Afghanistan and Nepal have been taken as study and focusing only on that.
That is not conscious.
But India, we are facing, it's very similar. Whether it happens in India, whether it happens outside, we are facing so many everywhere. So it really happens to us. But what I liked about it is in the analysis, there are brief critiques done, briefly done, but as I said, it's largely optimistic and hopeful that more can be done, even though she has just said that everything's shutting down. I don't think so. I don't think it will. I don't think that will happen. One thing I found curious, I know it was a government program, but I don't know, Sabla has not been mentioned at all anywhere. It came in 2010. It hasn't been mentioned in the kind of background given also the Rajiv Gandhi program, which was, and the other big missing one is the open school system, completely missing. Though it's servicing a large number of people who are out of school at the moment.
It's done partly with the Dusra Bashar school.
Yeah, there's kind of, it touches on, but then they were also using the Sabla program to try and do it. Of course, the effectiveness and all is another story, which we do need to study, which we need to see some questions. So anyway, thank you so much so far for listening to and thinking about what we've been saying over here. 3 questions, 5 questions? Okay, if whoever wants to ask questions, are there mics available, or can we just hear them? Could you please identify yourself and say who the question is aimed at? Please identify yourself. एक मिनट जी प्लीज, 1 मिनट बैठे, पहले यहाँ से the lady to my left, yes. Kindly identify yourself and keep the questions brief.
Good evening to everyone. I'm Monica Vishwas, former student of Namita ma'am, and my question is to Namita ma'am only. And right now I'm working as a vice principal in a government school, government girls school. So it's really challenging for us to keep the girls inside the school because of certain obvious reasons, societal reasons. My question is, ma'am, the purpose of education for us might be different, and for the children of the marginal section, it's